Hello, and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage.
Hi.
This is a series of videos, sometimes a podcast, where we chat about designing better miniatures games. We being myself, Glenn Ford, a game designer and developer, and my good friend, Mike Hutchinson, also game designer and developer.
Mike's the one with the hat and the glasses. Glenn's the one with the bigger beard.
For anybody not quite certain who isn't looking at the screen as we're talking. Obviously we're often working and developing and designing our own games. Something we've mentioned a few times recently is that Mike is deep in the weeds of developing the second edition of A Billion Suns. And now we've chatted a bit sort of generally amongst ourselves about what some of Mike's aims for the second edition, some of the things he wants to do. But we've not really had a very detailed discussion yet. And we've decided, possibly against better judgment, to have that first more detailed discussion on camera. And we're still going to talk through the things that Mike wants to do with the second edition, talk about some of the ways he's doing it. So in this first episode, Mike, you're going to sort of try and give me your overview design goals for this second edition, sort of, because I know, like I said, I know some of the things you want to do, but I really want to hear about what the aims are of this new set of development is, so I can sort of try and not jump on the wrong bits too heavily, and guide through this. So
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
do you want to talk through some of the high level design goals and overviews of this new edition?
Yeah. So there's a few things about Billion Suns that are important context. So one of them is that it was my second professional miniatures game after Gaslands and Gaslands Refueled. Actually, I think Gaslands Refueled came out before Billion Suns. I'm not completely sure now.
Yeah.
But the the second game syndrome, I think, was that I had a lot of ideas about things that I wanted to, let's just say, show off about. Like, I wanted to show my creativity. I wanted to show that it was a very different kind of game to Gaslands. I didn't want to get typecast as the Gaslands guy. And frankly, I ended up with a design direction that was extremely difficult, and I did an okay job of it, but there are things about the game which are problematic, and I'll go into more of that. The second piece of context is that the game, while well regarded, like theoretically, by quite a few people, is actually really hard to get on the table. Like, you don't know what miniatures you need. You need tons of miniatures. You need quite a lot of tokens and terrain and stuff. And so, like, getting it to the table for the first time is a sort of obnoxious experience. Once you've got everything that you need, like, you can play for ages and have an absolutely ton of content wrung out of it. But the barrier to entry is really high. The third thing is that it actually ended up coming out in February 2021, which was a terrible time to be a multiplayer tabletop miniatures game. And I sort of quickly got a solo mode out in beta, but the solo mode wasn't baked into the game from the beginning. And, it just, but that was a crazy time, and I didn't have enough time to really dedicate to it. So the game came out in a difficult time, and it didn't really get any initial sort of traction and community support because there wasn't really any way of community forming at that point. So it remains true that it's quite a good seller in the Blue Book Osprey line. Like, it's one of the best selling Blue Books, but it doesn't sell Gaslands numbers. And so what I wanted, for all of these reasons, I went back to Offspray with a proposal a while back and said, look, are you interested in doing a second edition of Billion Suns? I think there's lots of reasons that more content, a better, more considered core game design, better organized content, easier access, and honestly, just like a second throw of the dice in front of like an audience that maybe can go and actually speak to people and play games with. So that's the background to A Billion Suns, and that sort of begins to set up some of the design goals, but I'll go into those in more detail.
Yeah. I think definitely the onboarding is one of those things that we've talked about many times for A Billion Suns, and I know we'll get
Mm.
to that more in as we go into the conversation. But it's such a brick wall to get onto it. I think the thing of A Billion Suns, I always say, is that the epic stories it tells once you're playing it are genuinely incomparable. I think, like on the tabletop, um, the the achieving of those epic stories requires sort of a lot of hard work to get to, and
Mm.
sort of anything that can make that easier. And I do agree. I think there was a lot of that second game thing where it's like Gaslands is so sort of beer and pretzels, super easy to get into, incredibly low like entry level. And I think some of the pushing to differentiate A Billion Suns from Gaslands threw out some of the baby with the bathwater. You know what I mean? Where it's like,
It did, and I think one of the things that's really obvious going back to it is that I was punching above my weight, or rather, I didn't have the experience to really nail A Billion Suns. Um, and so I think I have a ton more experience now, and I think I have a much better and more, what's the word I want? A more like a more considered, a more brutal, like I can be a lot more specific and cutty, and I can cut more things out with more confidence, let's put it that way.
what one of the things I was sort of wondering, curious about is like, I remember for like original Billion Suns, one of the big images that you sort of came to me, and I know sort of came to Osprey with, was like there's a shot in one of the Star Wars movies
Yeah,
where
in Rogue One.
the Star Destroyer sort of jumps into the middle of a combat with all these little ships and just absolutely spills them to one side. And it's,
Mm.
it's very presence jumping in is like destroying ships and doing things. Um, and like that was represented in the game by jump shock as a rule,
Mm.
and that was a rule that was like there from day one and has been there all the way through. And my personal feeling with a Billion Suns is that the way it ended up doing like the story of Rogue One is in a much bigger way, a much sort of
Mm.
more like, okay, well, this is what's going on that planet, and you're sort of manipulating it from space, and there's all these interlocking stories. Like the thing about like Rogue One is that they're getting these plans in order to fuel the much like bigger story of the original Star Wars films. And I feel like, the way that Billion Suns tells that story is by having a planet there that you've got to get onto and doing some stuff. Well, over here, there's this little ship that's trying to like run a blockade. And then it's like, okay, well, now it's Rogue One because that's the planet that they're trying to get the plans on. And that ship there has got like Princess Leia in. And so now we're telling like that whole
Mm.
contiguous story across multiple tables. And that's where it can build from, rather than that little combat detail of, okay, well, here's this little combat detail that's achieving it. So
Yeah, and I think that those little combat details they're one of the things where, as a less experienced designer, I would put in explicit mechanics to capture a sensation that I wanted, rather than, more subtly building the emergent clockwork for those things to come out, and having that confidence to take a bunch of mechanics out because I know exactly that the cogs already exist in other systems for those little moments to emerge is definitely part of like the streamlining of the system. One other piece of context, the fifth piece of context going into this. At the time that I was writing A Billion Suns first edition, actually one of the initial impulses for even wanting to write A Billion Suns was playing Star Wars Armada and finding a game that didn't feel like the game I wanted from these Star Wars miniatures. I had these cool Star Wars miniatures, and the game I got was a battleships in space, like very much a lumbering kind of dreadnoughts. Like it was pretty much a battleship gothic setup. Like it was a Battle of Jutland or whatever it is. Like it's exactly that feeling. And I get it because like capital ships lumbering, making command decisions and having to sit with those command decisions, like all of that's good fun. But it didn't it didn't particularly grab me in any kind of science fiction-y way, and it didn't really and I found the whole game to be, ironically, quite lumbering and complicated and difficult to penetrate, with sort of mechanics that I just felt were unnecessarily complicated, because it's got quite a micromanagey system for like every side of a ship has different shield values and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. And like ultimately, that game is trying to be a mech combat in space sort of a thing, and I came at it with a different expectation. But anyway, that was useful because I came to that game and I wanted I wanted a different game experience than it was giving, and so that gave me a kind of initial shove for something to go after. That game's now gone to a degree, like support for that game is gone. I thought that Battlefleet Gothic would be out again by now. With back when I was writing A Billion Suns first edition, that's when Necromunda went through its funny little sort of three release spike where they brought out Shadow War Armageddon, and then they brought out Necromunda, and then they brought out Necromunda again, and there was a few other sort of specialist games rumblings. I think Old World was just beginning to be. So I was assuming that at some point between, and there was a video game, like there was a Battlefleet Gothic video game that was doing all right. So I assumed that there would be more competition. Like there was a lot of competition for Starship gaming, and right now there isn't a lot of big Starship games out there producing content on the regular. There is Drop Fleet Commander that's still putting out the occasional ship here and there. They put out a second edition actually quite recently. And one thing that I deliberately avoided with Billion Suns was like, let's not just make a Battle of Jutland, two fleets cruise towards each other and blow snot out of each other game. But people like those, and sometimes that's what they want to play. And so part of the goal of A Billion Suns, as well as making it more accessible, is to say, well, can it offer an opportunity to just blow snot out of each other in a way that doesn't undermine what the game's about? And I think that it can. And the reason I think that it can is that the first edition kind of came out as that prog rock thing. And so I can keep that game mode within the game, but then also have this other simpler way of just blowing snot out of each other. And I'm much more confident that that doesn't bury the lead in a way that it would have done with the first edition. I think it's actually a unique characteristic of being a subsequent edition that I can do that sort of building on top of it without necessarily completely undermining it. Because
Yeah.
if this were the first edition of a game and I said, like, I was literally talking to Malev earlier in the week, and he was sort of considering one of the game projects that he's working on, and he's got like an idea about another sort of game that it could be like, and I was giving him the perfectly reasonable advice that like make the first thing as awesome as you can and don't put a bunch of other shit that distracts from that, because that's distracting from the main thing, which is what I'm going to be doing deliberately and on purpose with A Billion Sun second edition. But I hope the context provided underscores why I think that's actually quite a good idea rather than a bad one.
Yeah, I think in a second edition, you've kind of got the first edition to say, well, this is what this game is in capital letters. And then the second edition can be some things the game isn't, if that makes sense. I think one of the things I think one of the things that's sort of interesting about the difference between Gaslands and A Billion Suns, like certainly in the first edition, is that a lot of the interesting Gaslands and what makes it really work are like emergent moments within the mechanics of like the gameplay loop. Like, you get destroyed, you flip, you blow up. Those and not that you get these nice little emergent chains in Gaslands, which are both very chaotic and very narrative. And there's relatively little like emergent gameplay or story within the scenarios. The scenario, like the main scenario being race, is super simple. You are here, you need get there. Really has like a super simple narrative and not much to it. Then in A Billion Suns, I feel like the emergent narrative doesn't come, in those sort of step-by-step gameplay movements. The emergent narrative comes from this clockwork of the multiple parts of the scenario that you generate sort of ticking around on the tabletop, and it feels like a living universe that you are inserting yourself into. And I think one of the things is like in A Billion Suns, there are quite a few like mechanics that will appear in there, like that ships explode when they're destroyed, and you have like the red alert things, and the difference the if you're going slow, you're easier to hit, and all those sort of stuff that feel like bits that are telling the sort of mechanical chain event emergent thing that works in Gaslands that never, super clicked in A Billion Suns. Partly because it's like, well, I'm not sure that like the chain reaction explosion of a bunch of fighters like colliding into each other because somebody jump shocked into them is as interesting as these smugglers are blockade running over there and you've got to like get to them as
Right. And so one of the things that I'm working on with this second edition is to like if I set up a simple, and we'll spend a lot more time talking about the like tutorial missions, but if I set up a tutorial mission and I give you a fixed fleet and I give you a set of resources and I give you some objectives, is there enough interplay in the core systems to create those kinds of like really enjoyable tactical puzzles, and those tactical puzzles have some like emergent little bubbly bits where you're like, okay, wow, okay, I didn't know you could do those three things in a row. And a lot of my focus is actually, as you've said there, is to sort of fix that issue that actually the core system is fun enough to play a straight up game because of the linking of the systems, and because I've trimmed away all of the other crap that was getting in the way, and I'm like having to remember about this micro rule and that micro rule, but instead focusing on the flow, the strategic flow of like, I have some ships and they're going to jump in, and where they jump in matters, and those ships can then launch other fighters, and the where I spend my order tokens is like critically interesting. And that's because I want that, I mean, that's because basically, like, when I look at skirmish games or battle games, like there is a baseline tactical interest of like two forces smashing snot out of each other, which lots of people enjoy, and I enjoy to a degree. And I think that, there's plenty of space to make an enjoyable experience there where the rule system is really streamlined and focused on the fun, and there's enough interest in the way that the game is unfolding that the decisions matter, even if they're not telling the most interesting stories. And this is because, I've played a bunch of 40k over the last 2 years. I've demoed a bunch of Hobgoblin over the last 2 years. Like, I know where games fall down and where games succeed in delivering like an exciting, rapidly unfolding strategic puzzle for you. And so I think I can do that with A Billion Suns. Like, everything about the game that I'm optimizing in that direction is about, just providing a strategic puzzle that you can set up, click the switch, and then like boom, oh yes, juicy decisions, resource management, love it.
Well, my feeling is that the thing that is really good about A Billion Suns on that sort of tactical strategic level is it's for me two main things is the weapon dice system and the silhouettes,
Mm-hmm.
and the bubble range, the donuts and bubbles, and
Right.
to a degree like the things like Mother's Wing, where you sort of you can assemble this sort of little death ball, and all covering each other's weaknesses and strengths.
Europe.
And I think like there's a huge, and like whenever I
Because those are the most interesting relational things.
and the thing about like the dice mechanic and the silhouettes mechanic, it's such a beautiful, elegant. It genuinely is a really lovely, elegant rule thing, and it's one of these things where it's like, when I do explain A Billion Suns to people at conventions, that's one of the things that you mention it, and you get that little moment from people where they just sort of go, "Oh, that's absolutely, that's lovely. I really love that idea." So, like, in case people aren't aware, in A Billion Suns, ships have a silhouette which is like how big they are, and you roll dice to try and hit them
Yeah,
by.
and specifically, like a little tiny fighter will have a silhouette of 3, and an absolutely massive warship will have like a silhouette of 8 or 9.
Yeah, and you roll the dice of the thing you're shooting at them, trying to get under their silhouette, because the bigger you are, the easier you are to hit.
Yeah, so if I'm rolling a d6 to hit a fighter, I need to get a 1, a 2, or a 3.
Yeah, so small guns roll small dice, which means
Hmm.
that a small gun that's rolling a d6 will like inevitably hit a massive like Star Destroyer.
Yeah, if I've got a silhouette 8 ship and I shoot it with a d6, only a 6, which is a dud, will miss. So it's a shoe-in. It's a barn door.
Yeah, whereas the Star Destroyers are rolling like, D12s, D20s, which means that it's
Just
almost.
d12s. There's no d20s.
I think there was a D20 like early
There
on,
might there might have been early in the development, but yeah.
but they're rolling
But yeah,
like.
D10s and D12s are the heaviest weapons.
Yeah, and so they're almost never going to hit that small fighter, but they also then roll those dice to try and get, past the shields of the thing that they're hitting, and it defines how much damage they do. So you've got these fighters that are just piling shots into a destroyer and just doing absolutely nothing,
Hmm.
and destroyers that are trying to shoot fighters and just can't hit them. And then you need the different ships to bridge those gaps and fill in each other's weaknesses and abilities. And that's this super elegant tactical strategic thing that does so much and
Yeah,
offers.
it provides this like really emergent rock paper scissors thing
Mm,
where once you've got like there's a ship that you really want to deal with, like now you have to think about, well, what tools do I need? Do I have the tools available? Where do I get the tools from?
yeah, whereas like I say, things like ships blow up when they're destroyed and you've got jump shock is it's like when I'm looking at an A Billion Suns table trying to think strategically and tactically, I'm thinking about the silhouettes and the gun types and the donut ranges and the bubbles and things. And I never think about the chain reactions of things exploding. They don't factor in, and then it's like something does explode, and someone's like, "Oh, there's a thing." There's a thing where it's destroyed where we have to check about the exploding, and you go to the rule book, and it's like those bits always felt like things you sometimes remember, as opposed to in Gaslands, where those things feel like, hooray, time to start the chain reaction machine.
Right,
Joy
yeah.
joy will pour out at the end of it. Finally, someone's blown up. We can do some like explosion checks. Hooray! Their fuel tank's gone. This is time for the fireworks factory to go off. Um, so to sort of wrap up this introductory bit of what's going to be a bit of an ongoing conversation, can you crystallize down relatively quickly then the overview of the things you want to achieve?
Well, I guess I can do. Let me go one level higher. So let me give you the design principles that are driving this. So from this discussion, you've got a sense of like what it is I'm trying to achieve. But the design principles really, there's 4 of them. I think it's about 4 of them. These often, oddly enough, we say write them at the beginning and then stick to them. But like I evolve them as I learn what the game is to a degree. But anyway, these are the 4 that I've got right now. One is lower the barrier to play, or lower the barriers to play. The second, which is kind of the watchword of the whole design, is the ultimate spaceship toolkit. So I'm not afraid for this game to be multiple things. In fact, I want it to be the ultimate spaceship toolkit.
Mm.
Um, Number 3 is emphasize the things that make A Billion Suns special. So that is, as we discussed, that's the epic sci-fi stories, but it's also the jumping in and the multiple tables and the neat dice system. So like it's probably that's about the most of them, but like emphasize the thing that make A Billion Suns special. And then the last one is um I want it to be simpler than first edition, but it's still not afraid to be an expert game.
Mm.
So I'm not trying to make this into like my first spaceship game. I think everything that I'm trying to achieve with this game, particularly the multiple game modes and stuff, like it is going to be an expert game, and that's fine. Like I tend in my design world to speak to an experienced, um, a crowd of people who are expert miniature gamers. So I want A Billion Suns to be both for the discerning and experienced tabletop gamer who hasn't played A Billion Suns first edition, but also for those people who've played first edition. It's not like, oh man, he just ripped all of A Billion Suns out and now it's just a garbage sort of simple toy thing. So yeah, those are the four things.
Yeah, because I think like at the moment, a lot of what the the first edition of A Billion Suns is for sort of experienced tabletop gamers, because experienced tabletop gamers quite often accept the fact that the book means nothing to them the first four times they read it.
Right.
And so this is, of course this is a load of incomprehensible gibberish. This is and instead of that being like, well, this is for an expert gamer because it keeps saying like, oh, here's a thing over here that you're going to want to delve into.
Right. And like to a degree, some of that is that there's a ton of cognitive overhead because there's a bunch of like guff that oughtn't to be in there that you're having to manage. And so I want to strip away that, but like the core of the game is still really difficult, but like not in an irritating cognitive like overload way, just in like oh man, this is a hard game to play right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's a bit of an overview of where Mike is and what he's trying to look to with A Billion Suns second edition. As I sort of alluded to, I think there's going to be a few conversations in this series.
Yeah, let's come back next week and we'll talk about the changes to the core rules that maybe emerge from all this crap.
Absolutely. So that's the temptation to come back next time. We're going to talk about the things that Michael is actually pulling out and changing and monkeying around with in A Billion Suns. So you can return and see that he's thrown out your absolute favorite mechanic in the whole thing and get very, very angry, or be delighted, more likely that
No, I really love destroying jump points.
Yeah, okay. So if you have played A Billion Suns and you've got some opinions about the ways the second edition should go, please swing down into the comment section and let Mike know the things that you'd like to see. If, and this might be a more likely event, you've read A Billion Suns first edition, been interested in it, and never gotten it to the tabletop, even more so, swing down to the comment section and let us know exactly. Probably have suspicions as to exactly why that is, but very useful to know and hear that from people. Please hit the
Is
like.
it because all the spaceship illustrations didn't have any background to them?
Hit the like and subscribe while you're down there. Check the link section because there's going to be a link across there into our Discord where you can swing by and talk very directly to Mike and other people who will have interest and opinions about A Billion Suns. Those sorts of things would be really handy. Also, in the link section, there's links across to our Patreons where you can support the channel directly, and the various places where you can buy and support our games and stuff. But for now, I think from this episode, Rule of Carnage, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.